Toi te ara puoru sounds.
Engari o wenga mana, rauranga tirama, tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai tau mai and welcome to Inspiring Journeys Through Music, presented by Toi Te Arapuoru Sound Centre for New Zealand Music. Ko Lana Te Piki Broughton tēnei, and today I'm joined by Mere Tokorahi Poynton. Whakarongo mai rā. Kei te waine, tō mai I a tamanui te rā, ki runga I te upoko o te ika, mai I te tai rāwhiti. Te mokopuna hine pū ko urangi, tēnā koe, kei te māraikura, tau mai rā e mere. Tēnā ki mō ai te iwi ki a koe, hoi anō kei te mō kē ki a koe. He paku kupu hei mii ki te iwi, hei whakamārama ko ai koe.
Tēnā koe mō tō mihi mai ki ahau, te kohine mai I Taranaki, ko Mere Tokorahi Poynton ahau, no te aitanga mahaki, no te aitanga hauiti, no tūhoi o hoki ahau. Engari, I tipu ake ahau I Wainganui I taku iwi o te aitanga mahaki.
Tēnā koe me ora I me o nui. Tēnā, let's go back a bit in time to your earlier years, where it sort of all began perhaps. What was it like growing up in that area amongst your people, and where did the influence to get into music come from?
I tīmata mai I te puku pea. I grew up in Mangatu Blocks, which is at the back of Te Tai Rāwhiti. My dad was a farmer for Mangatu Incorporated, which is owned by Te Aitanga Mahaki. And I suppose my reo was influenced by the vastness of that whenua, stripped of the korowai of Papatuanuku, and I used to sing to the sheep. So that was where it all started, but I was discovered by the principal, the headmaster of Te Karaka Primary School. We had moved from Mangatu to Te Karaka when I was 9 years of age. And while I was in the kapahaka group there, I always used to harmonise on top, because my mum taught me how to do that. We used to sing, "You are my sunshine, my only sun," and then I would harmonise with her when we were driving in the car. And so he arranged for me to have singing, to audition with this wahine, Maureen Potros from Gisborne. And I went along to sing to her. I think I was 11. And the only sort of waiata I knew were Christmas carols and Amazing Grace, in English. So I sang those to her, and she said, "Oh, yes, she's got a nice voice. Yes, I'll take her on." So it started there. And I stayed with Maureen till I was 17 years of age. And we learnt, I learnt classical singing, so, in the style of opera, and learnt a lot of aria from her. I competed in a lot of competitions, so in Gisborne, in Heretaunga, in Auckland, in Tauranga, and in Wellington, singing competitions, and I was really good at it. I'm very competitive. Well, I'm a Poynton, so we're very competitive. And I won a lot of competitions, but I ended up going to Victoria University when I was 18, and I intended to study music, but I had no music theory. So I changed my degree and did a degree in Te Reo Māori. And that really turned my waka in another direction towards Te Reo Māori, me ngā reo Māori. So that began my journey, I suppose, as a Māori artist.
Ataua, and listening to not only your waiata, but the many art productions you've created, you've got quite some stories to tell, to share with Kai Wakarongo. How did learning Te Reo Māori at university sort of shape that narrative of some of the stories you've been telling?
Hugely. Back in the day I was performing in Aotearoa with that reggae group, and we were a kaupapa band. So we travelled all around the universities and performed waiata like Maranga, 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 you know, all of those, and I loved that. But Te Reo Māori has really informed who I am now as an artist and who I am as an artistic director. So I went on to become the artistic director of Takirua Theatre in 94 to 97. And for me, I was passionate about Te Reo Māori, and I started up the Te Reo Māori season with the influence and this tautoko of our kaumātua like Wikuki Ka, Kiri Ka, Rona Bailey, Wahine Pākehā, Kuia Pākehā, Sunny Amy, Simon Garrett. These were all people who were passionate about creating space for Māori to tell our stories, our pūrākau. And people like Whitu Whāla influenced me too, and they were on their own journey of Te Reo Māori, reclaiming their reo, decolonising. I didn't know what decolonising was in those days, but for me it was becoming, reclaiming myself as a Māori person. So Te Reo Māori really has driven who I am as an artist and as an artistic director. So now I work for Tāwhiri, which is an organisation that creates events and festivals, and my job is director Ngā Toi Māori. So I take it very seriously and am very passionate about creating space for our Māori artists, not only to tell stories through theatre, but through music, through dance, through visual arts, and through any means that we need to tell our pūrākau. But I'm particularly interested in pūrākau I roto i Te Reo Māori.
You've touched on many kaupapa there, absolutely amazing mahi that you've been a part of that has created that space. And if I can just reflect on takirua for a moment, reflecting on my own childhood, where takirua was a very normal part of going to kura kaupapa. We expected takirua, we expected the Reo Māori season, and perhaps even took it for granted. What were some of the earlier conversations that had to go on when that was first being developed?
Not many. I think it started from the renaming of the Depot Theatre to Takirua. And in those days, Tuinia Baker was around. And when we were considering making Depot Theatre a bicultural theatre, we had to come up with a new name. And she proposed Takirua because it's a weaving together of the weft and the waft, you know. And it signifies a biculturalism, weaving together as one. I'm almost 60 now, so when I was a rangatahi tonu, I was on my journey in Te Reo, and there was a groundswell of young people coming through who we're now becoming the kaumātua, but our uri, our tamariki kōrero Māori. And that was the dream. So we had to create stories and find ways to inspire not only our generation, but ngā uri whakaheke. So for me, it was only natural to propose a Te Reo Māori season. And when we did it, we got some funding through it was the Queen Elizabeth Arts Council in those days. It's called Creative New Zealand now. But when we put in the application for funding, we got enough pūtea to do a very, very basic Te Reo Māori season, of which my friend Tony Huata was in, Korowai. And it was so crack up because I was the artistic director, you know, sometimes the stage manager, the dishwasher, the wharipaku cleaner, and also the set designer, and make the costumes.
Te katoa, the whole shebang.
Te katoa. But that's how we did it, you know, everyone just mucked in. We mucked in those days, and I just remember people first coming to see those little plays and being seen. I think our people felt seen to hear their own reo being spoken. And from there on, we've seen the trajectory that Takirua has gone on in terms of making the Te Reo Māori season basically the knuckle of what they do. And so now what we're seeing is the artistic director, Tāne Mahuta Gray, creating an amazing work, Hatupatu and Kuru Ngaituku, which is an aerial work, which is in Te Reo Māori and, ka haere tonu. Ka haere tonu ki te taumata o Te Reo Māori. And so that makes my heart sing. It makes me so happy. And now we see films being made in Te Reo Māori. There's no end to what we can do. And my dream is that this country becomes bilingual, that Te Reo Māori becomes an everyday language for all of us, not just a language of ceremony or ritual. It's a language that we speak when we meet each other on the street. Pākehā Māori, Indian, haina mana mai, tātou katoa. There shouldn't be any kind of barrier to us all speaking Māori. In Europe, they speak 3 languages, so what's the problem? Ko te raruraru, kai roto I te whakaaro anake. So I think that as New Zealanders, as a nation, if we all kōrero Māori, then we know what a Māori perspective is, and then we truly become a nation which is one people.
Tēnā koe, nō reira, kei te wakaaro o te tangata, so it's sort of more in the thinking of individuals, or perhaps not even individuals, but clusters, perhaps. Nō reira, ka whakaaro ake ki o tūranga. So you've gone from, not to say you've neglected this or you've left it behind, but you've gone from singing, from acting. We've, of course, recognised you as Mavis from Once We're Warriors, which must have created so many opportunities for you. But the transition, or the expansion, if you like, from such roles into these high-level positions as director, Ngātoi Māori director for Tāwhiri, CEO in the past of Takirua events at Te Papa Tongarewa. What was that journey like for you, going from hands-on arts to a lot of behind the scenes, but not just behind the scenes, a lot of those higher level conversations, more critical conversations? What was that like?
For me, I've never stopped being an artist. It always informs what I do. So even though I dip in and out of it, I'm still an artist, and I still get asked to create and to be in different things. And the difficulty is trying to shapeshift from being an artist to an artistic director. And as you get older, kei te ngenge haere ahau e tahi wā, so I can't move as fast. But for me, being an artistic director is informed by my practice. If I don't understand what it is to be an artist, then I shouldn't be doing the job, because I don't know what it feels like for the artist to be asked to do something, like marketing. We ask them when we promote the artist, we need this, this, this and this. We have a little check-off list as producers, and it can be intimidating for artists because, kei roto rātou te rangi tūhaha. Many artists are dreamers, and they float around in that space, and sometimes they find it hard to land. So things like contracts can throw people. And my job is to awhi, to manaaki, to help people through that process so that they're not intimidated by that. It's just, it's to help us organise you, to show you in the best light possible. And, I've come to this mahi by chance. I feel very lucky, that I've been given so many opportunities to be an artist, but also to be an artistic director. And I feel very honoured to be able to create space for our Māori artists, and I love to see artists fly and to do their thing and to be who they are in totality. So as an artistic director, mahi is a lot of it's administration, a lot of it is sitting in front of a computer, talking to people on the phone, kanohi ki te kanohi, but once you see something on stage, te ātāhua hoki. That's why we do this work, and to look around and see how people are enjoying it and how they're receiving it, to see our reo on many platforms is very, very gratifying. And I believe that, I truly believe that we get led by wairua into these spaces. So things happen to me and I don't know why I'm here, but for me it's wairua leading me so that I can make space for others who come after me or beside me.
Creating space for others, what are some of the kaupapa that are going on at the moment within that space?
For me, I'm working to produce the Aotearoa New Zealand Festival of the Arts 2024, and the program that we're creating is going to feature the most Māori works that vehicle has ever produced. So the New Zealand Festival of the Arts, or the International Festival of the Arts, or the Wellington Festival of the Arts has gone through many iterations in terms of ingoa, but now we call it the Aotearoa New Zealand Festival of the Arts. It's 40 years old. It'll be 40 in 2026. And I've been employed as the director Ngā Toi Māori. And for me, I take that very seriously, and I'm going to take the space. So I say half the program and half the pūtea koa. And for me, I work from a Tiriti Waitangi base, tangata whenua, tangata tiriti, koera. It's obvious to me what that means. And some people struggle with that, particularly with people who are used to the festival being a space that's dominated by international work and by Pākehā work. And that becomes the norm. People don't see that actually is not fair. So for me, it's about taking some of the, shouldering the responsibility of that and taking some of the hits for that. But kei te pai tērā, I've got big shoulders.
So is that how you combat some of those attitudes towards, we'll say, toi Māori? Or is there a bit more that goes into it where you're having to have more conversations, or you're having to even sort of fight for the space? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, I try to come from a place from aroha, of aroha, but sometimes you've got to stand up. And I often get challenged by various people who are used to the old way. And I just talk, I try and tell them straight that, Māori deserve to have a space just like you. And if you have a problem with that, wahaere ki te tahi atu mea. That we're here now and it's not going to change. It's an everyday occurrence. It's an everyday occurrence of being challenged, and people don't like change. But I think that not only changing the programming, but also changing the way that our staff work in tāwhiri and how the paradigm that they look through, and I tell them it's about manaakitanga. Think about it that way. Whanangatanga, manaakitanga. How would you like to be treated? How would you like to be received? How would you like to be supported? Think about it that way, and think about coming from a ngākau manawa aroha, how you would like to be held. And but also to be cognizant of the sharing of resources to be fair. I've also had situations where I've been challenged by other cultures, in our society here in Aotearoa about why Māori anake. But it isn't Māori anake. It's about creating space for Māori koe ki te tuatahi to create the balance. Then, ka kuhu mai koutou ki roto. Let Māori take the space first to redress the balance, and then you come along with us. I'm not trying to stop you. I'm just trying to make things right. Yeah.
What kind of shifts have you seen with not just non-Māori attitudes changing over time, but also Māori Indigenous people perhaps valuing and recognising their own mana? Do you have some examples where we've seen quite a shift, maybe through the generations or even through the last years?
Absolutely. And I think it's skyrocketing. It's just taken off within the last 5 or so years that, from my observation. When way back in the 80s and the 90s when we weren't allowed to say kia ora, people were triggered by us saying kia ora. Next minute I'm having an argument with someone about the treaty. But today, our people are on a trajectory. They're making films in te reo Māori. Women, wahine Māori, are really leading that space. People like Bex Arahanga, Riwia Brown, who wrote along with Once Were Warriors, Itimata Mai Reira pia, and Catherine Akuhata Brown. There are many people coming through who are making films, and but in music. You've got pop music, you've got jazz, you've got classical music. Te reo Māori is really infiltrating all spaces of art practice, and our people are starting to realise the power of that we belong to this whenua, and we need to sing to the whenua. Kia ora ai te whenua. Kai te ora te whenua, kai te ora mātou. Tātou katoa.
Kua kitea te nui o ngā hua mai i au mai i pēnei i te tauira kua tukuna mai i tēnei wātonu. What are some things that you would like to see in the future within the arts with regards to Indigenous narratives being told through these stories?
There are no boundaries. I think people should be allowed to tell whatever story they want to tell. Sometimes our people can get traditional and ka pēhea e tahi atu. Kauaka. People need to say what they say, i roti te reo Māori. But I am also excited that our tipuna stories are being told. So, like Tāne Mahuta Gray is creating a work about Hatupatu and Kurungaituku. He created a work about Māui, Tiki Tiki. Bring all those superheroes back, i roti te reo Māori, and inspire our tamariki and our mokopuna, but also tell stories that inspire intergenerationally. I don't think that there's any barriers or boundaries. The only barriers are in your mind. And bringing back, but also be led by our tipuna, and the integrity that they held, and to remember them and to celebrate them. People of my mother's and father's generations, they couldn't kōrero Māori, but they provided the fertile ground so that we could. And I'm forever grateful for my parents. Sacrificing for me and my brother and my sister, and they knew that education was the key, and that whānau is the key, and belonging and returning to your iwi is the key.
Me te tika uki. Nō reira, ka whakaaro ki aua no whiako, thinking about your experiences and the appreciation that you have for the sacrifices and the commitment that your mātua made so that you could have this ara, and not just this ara for yourself personally, but the opportunity to create or to clear paths so that many of us could follow in your footsteps and their footsteps. How does that make you feel? You know, what reflecting on the years that have passed and having an appreciation for everything that's come since then. What are some of the emotions? What are some of the thoughts? What are some of the aspirations that you have in reflecting on that?
Well, I see the hua of that already. I've just come back from Waimana, where I was working with an amazing singer from New York. But then also my whānau were having a wānanga down the road at our other marae Tātaia Hape. And I went along there and just to see the excitement of my family, of my whānau. And, you know, the Boynton whānau who have married into Pākehā people and who have lost that taha Māori, they're decolonising themselves. And to see our mokopuna kōrero i te reo matatau i te reo Māori. And now those mokopuna are helping our generation to decolonise. That's the power, is that it's happening within our families. We don't need an organisation to tell us how to do it. We have to do it for ourselves as families, as our whānau, as our hapu, as our iwi, as Māori people. We don't need people to hold us up, to crutch us up. We can do it kia tū te tuanui. You know, we have our own tuara. We can do it for ourselves. And that's how I've been throughout my whole life. It's like, don't you tell me what to be or how to be. I'm going to do it anyway. And it's kind of an attitude I've had. I don't like anyone telling me, no, you can't do that, Mere. Why not? I'm going to do it anyway. And I think we need to be brave and just step into it. And but to have the backing of each other and of our whānau, that's most important. I think sometimes we've been so colonised that we stop each other. Oh, don't do that. Oh, don't do that. You know, and we need to stop that. Yes, let's do that. And play.
I love that attitude. I'm just going to do it anyway. Because you already know. And so allowing other people's perspectives or other people's anxieties to get in the way does slow us down, and not just slows us down, but can actually keep us from creating and bringing a lot of these stories to life that need to be brought to people's attention.
Yes.
Nō reira, on that note, what are some words that you might have, or some advice, further advice you might have for up and coming or established artists who are sort of still trying to find their way, or still in these positions of figuring things out?
I think trust yourself. You know intuitively what you want to do. Yes, get some guidance, but don't listen to negativity. Don't listen to people when they say no, because it's just creating, you know, nothing is ever perfect. What is perfect? Just make. Try it. Work with people who are like-minded, people who have the same vibration as you. If you work with people who are negative, they're just going to go scratch, 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 take you down to their level. Don't. Surround yourself with people who are positive, who are supportive. And also, of course, get the pukenga that you need. Do the training that you need. Ask around. Don't be afraid to step into spaces and try something new. I do that. I still do that today. I love to challenge myself. I don't like to stay in the same route. I like to go off on another tangent. So now I'm working with this wahine who's a full-on improviser, and she goes from, she doesn't work from her intellect, she works from her place of emotion, and it's very freeing. So yes, make sure you do the training if you need it. You know, go to have your piano lessons, or go to drama school, or find other means. I mean, I see a lot of young people use the internet. There's so much information available on there to there's master classes on acting and master classes on singing, and use all the tools that are available to you. So many more tools available to you nowadays than there were in my day. We had to go to singing, a singing teacher, or to go and have a piano lesson or something like that. And whereas nowadays you just go on your cell phone and you can learn. And I see a lot of young people doing that nowadays. But also be discerning in what you choose to do. And of course, believe in yourself.
When you brought up the technology and accessing it, I think you're absolutely right. We have so much more access than perhaps in former years. And one thing I think many of us tend to think of when we think about technology is how much of our time it uses, and this is in addition to very busy lives, especially for artists. So a partai that maybe we should be asking ourselves, and what I'd love to ask you is, how do you keep that balance? How do you balance it out so that you're working on your craft, you're creating the space, but you're also taking care of yourself as well?
Well, it's something that I've done my whole life. So I try to eat well. I exercise. I do yoga. I walk. I swim in the sea. Being in nature is very important to me. So, decolonize yourself from your iPhone and go for a hikoi in the bush. I think what I observe with young people nowadays is kei te rangirua rātou, all over the place. Anxious, anxiety. I suffer from anxiety myself, and I'm sure it started from using the phone too much and being on the keyboard too much. It takes over your life, and what it does, you become like an auto person. You become like a machine. So therefore, you must get back in contact with Papatūānuku and spend more time in nature. I mean, you had composers like Hirini Melbourne who spent a lot of time in the ngahere, being inspired by the manu, being inspired by the rain, by Tamarui Te Rā, by Papatūānuku, by all the creatures. So yes, you can get amazing ideas from your telephone and what's available there, but also get in touch with what's real, with the earth. Kei reira, because otherwise you can get lost.
Nō reira, me hoki atu ki te ngaere to those ties that bind us from Ranginui to Papatūānuku. And ako wake nei ka whai wāpia ki te wakarongo ki a koe waiata na I tō waiata āio. But before we go into that, it has me thinking about your waiata āio. It's very settling, it's very karongo I te wairua. Can you share a little more about āio and perhaps behind the composition of āio?
Yes. I composed it during COVID, and a woman called Jenny Wallerman, who teaches classical singing at Victoria University, had asked me many times, where can I get some waiata I roti te reo Māori for my students to sing? Because, the only songs they have access to Italian aria, German songs, French, and the only kind of waiata she could find were hine, po kare kare ana, all of those ones. And I said, well, you need to commission people to write. So she got some pūtea through Creative New Zealand, and she asked 21 woman composers to compose waiata. So she asked me. And COVID was a time when we were all thrown into disarray, nera. So for myself, to ground myself, I would, like listen to Rose Pere. And Rose Pere was the wahine who did a lot of her karakia and her waiata in Aio. And so I took inspiration from that. And the tune just came to me and it wouldn't go away. I was trying to change it, but it stayed in the shape that it is now. And I gave that to Glenda Kim, who arranged it with piano. And then you hear it on sounds with Jenny Wallerman singing it. She's a beautiful soprano. And I was blown away when I heard her singing Aio, so stoked. And she said at the end that she just couldn't get it out of her head. It was the one waiata that stuck in her mind. I was like,
I'm reflecting on how uncertain those times were when we were in lockdown with COVID, and some of the unsettling emotions I think we were feeling during that time. And to know that you produced this waiata, or you composed this waiata during those unsettling times, what are some of the thoughts and emotions you're hoping to provoke within individuals when they listen to this waiata?
Meditation. And within it, I also say return te ira wahine, te mana wahine, te ira atua, te mana ahine. Return the feminine, because I think that's the problem with our world. The vibration of today is a male vibration, and it's fast. Men are purposeful. That's their job. Wahine, we're about nurturing, we're about wairua, so we need to balance it up. And that's why I created Aio, because I felt that the feminine principle needed to be returned kia tō, kia papatuanuku. And so that was my hope, was that it would allow people to enter into that space and to remember the feminine, te wahinetanga.
Tā ua rere. Kei te mihi atu ki a koe te waine. Ko taipea te wā ki whakatauira mai koe ki te minenga nei I tērā āiotanga. We'll hand it over to you to sing to us Aio. Kei a koe.
Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe.
Ai.
That was Mere Tokorahi Boynton with Aio, accompanied by James Illingworth. This series is produced by Toi Te Ara Puoru, Sound Centre for New Zealand Music. All waiata have been provided courtesy of the artist. To find out more about today's episode, or more about music of Aotearoa New Zealand, go to sounds.org.nz. That's sounz.org.nz. Ko Lana Te Piki Broughton tēnei. Thanks for watching. Mā te wā.
Toi Te Ara Puoru. Sound.